over? No, I'm joking. I just knew the topic that happened. Well, I don't know why I gave myself this topic, but we talking about the title here is it all that helpful? Accountability and tolerance in churches. Accountability and tolerance are both sort of stand-in words for a bunch of other stuff. You just say this about unity and tensions in churches and challenges to that, and what are things that we should get along on, and what are things that these are things that we really can't live with, or things that we need to be helping someone get out of, and things that we said, no, I might not agree with that, but we can live with each other. And so, again, just to kind of talk about where we're headed Wednesday, I think, Jared, are you Wednesday or Florence? I don't remember.
Yeah, Sunday.
Okay. So, Flex class Wednesday, and then we start a series of kind of working back to some of these bigger topics, like God's mercy and justice, grace, truth. And then, so today is last in this series of kind of things that deal with daily topics for Christians. So, let me ask you all to begin with here. What are some Bible metaphors? I don't know, some might say these are more descriptions. I would say taking something that's literally something else and using it as a description of relationships in churches. So, how does the Bible, what metaphors does the Bible use?
Body. One's an eye, one's a foot.
Right. So body. What else?
Right. Right.
Uh-huh.
Right.
Right, yes. So, right, I forgot, I don't know why I forgot about that one, but I forgot about that one. But that's a good one. That's a marital relationship, household, right, family. And so I put a few pictures up here. I wish I had thought about the bride. I would put that up here too. And so, look. Bible describes us all these ways. I put this up here. I don't know what this is from Bowling Green, but reflecting community. Bible sometimes refers to the fellowship, the Greek word that derives from, we derive our word community or communal from it. And so, what do all these sort of indicate? There are different ways. Go ahead.
And you interact with each other?
Well, and you're right. There's an integrated or interactive relationship. And what about those relationships?
The closeness is what I get out of it.
Yeah. That there's a bond. There's something shared. There's some. It's more than just, hey, here's the clerk at the store, and we're passing each other or interacting on a short-term basis. It's much more long-term. And so we're working with shared values, some common purpose, there's commonality, but what does it also tend to lead to? Well, even families that get along most of the time don't always get along. Even husbands and wives, we had a class last fall on marriage and Proverbs. Even the strongest marriages in this most intimate of relationships, when marriage exists, that there isn't some tension at one time or another. I mean, maybe you're in one that doesn't, and, more power to you. But, most people, because you still have separate parts, separate entities. And so even if you share a lot and have a lot in common, still there's some tendency to be pulling in different directions and different opinions on things. And so, the question next is, well, let's think just a little bit about churches, and particularly Apostle Paul, not just teaching him, we're going to get to some of the teaching here in a minute, not just where he was teaching about dealing with these tensions, but he was experiencing them himself. He was in the middle of them. What are some examples?
Well, Well, like when he withstood Peter to his face, kind of some of the Jewish traditions trying to be forced on the Gentiles and circumcision, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we read that like, okay, well, Paul withstood Peter to the face. That had to be somewhat tense, you know, because this is going on in Jerusalem. Paul is the outsider of this community who's come in. Peter is one of the leaders, even the leaders among the leaders. And Paul was saying, hey, he stood condemned. Yeah, I withstood him to the face. That could not have been, you know, there had to be a feeling of tension. Other examples?
I would think Paul and Barnabas obviously had the same goal on the same team, but when it came to Mark, had differing views, and so they had to, for a while, to go their separate ways.
Yeah, this sort of speaks to, you know, oh, these are in different sort of settings and different topics, but yes, and in fact, they had a fairly heated dispute. And we could kind of think about that later and say, well, Barnabas was right. Well, but maybe at the moment, Paul, maybe Mark needed to be left behind. Maybe that helped him in the end. You know, it's hard to know on that. But yeah, there was a lot of tension, and it's interesting, that comes between two people that had shared a tremendous amount together and had already been out teaching the word, and hey, they had worked together on so many things so closely, and yet this tension arises. So I have both of those here. There's one that stood out to me too from Galatians, the 2nd chapter, and that's where that one about Peter also comes from there. But Paul comes to Jerusalem, or excuse me, Peter instead happened at Antioch, but Paul comes to Jerusalem. And what did some of the people want to happen to Titus?
Circumcised.
Yeah, makes you wonder who was the doorman, who was checking up on these things. But I guess one way or another. And it is interesting, though, that even within Paul's own life, he deals with these tensions differently. He recognized with Timothy that it's going to be useful if Timothy is circumcised. Because why? People knew his father wasn't a Jew, and they were going to be going into synagogues. Here they are trying to carry the gospel into these Jewish places. You know, this wasn't the Jewish people coming to them. They were going to, it's okay, let's be proactive and let's try to diminish these tensions. Where with Titus, these were some of these Jewish believers who were saying, well, he was not Jewish, but he's got to be circumcised. And Paul says, yeah, not even Titus, who was with me, was compelled, even though he was a Greek. This matter arose because of the false believers had infiltrated our ranks to spy on the freedom we have in Christ Jesus and to make us slaves. And so again, you know, dealing with a very similar issue in a different way because of the circumstances. And it's kind of interesting. So then if we go to Corinth, and it's very interesting, Lawrence and I didn't get together on this, but he talked about 1 Corinthians 10. I went back and forth the last couple of weeks thinking, well, you know, there are lots of things we could talk about and lots of examples. And what might be the best way to kind of put this as small enough package we could do it in the time we have. So I thought about the church of Corinth. And here's a church experiencing a lot of tensions. Acts chapter 1 begins addressing this, and much of the book seems to be addressing this. And so one of the things that's interesting is you've got these two sides to even, that almost stand right next to each other. And so in what way were the Corinthians being too tolerant? On what topic were they embracing things they should not embrace.
Well, the guy who had his, what was it, mother-in-law or sister-in-law or something really creepy.
Something weird. It's actually reported that there is sexual immorality of man, you know, a kind that even the pagans could not tolerate. A man is sleeping with his father's wife, and they were proud. And so, again, it's hard to make sense of exactly what attitude, but he's saying they actually seem to be very pleased with themselves, maybe that they can tolerate this. And he says, shouldn't you rather go in the morning and have put out of your community, out of your fellowship, the man has been doing this. But just the chapter before, Paul is saying something totally opposite, not about sexual immorality, but about this whole issue of, you know, people saying, I'm a Peter and I'm Paul, I'm a Apollos. He brings that to a head by saying, I care very little if I'm judged by you or by any human. Indeed, I do not even judge myself. My conscience is clear, but that doesn't make me innocent. It is the Lord who judges me. Therefore, judge nothing before the appointed time. Wait until the Lord comes. He will bring to light what is hidden in darkness and will expose the motives of the heart. At that time, each will receive praise from their God. And so here he is saying, all right, in chapter 5, you need to be making judgments here. You need to be doing something about this. You need to be putting this man out of your community. Now we found out in 2 Corinthians that, you know, this actually worked to good of not just the community of Christians, but to this individual too, that it impacted him and helped him come back to the Lord. But rather than tolerating that, he says you need to do something about this. Whereas in this other case, he's saying, no, look, quit judging each other's lives. The Lord is the ultimate judge here, and you've got him. And so this tension, you see both sides of it. So, you know, and there's an irony in that. We'll have classes on irony down the road, but the fact that one chapter to the next, you see both sides of today's topic. So let me ask you this, you know, if we focus on 1 Corinthians, how does Paul encourage the church to work toward unity and to diminish tensions? How does he go at that? Lawrence, and some of you may have been in there, had a class on 1 Corinthians. What? Lawrence, I'll put it to you. How does he try to build unity and diminish tensions? You know, he teaches on a number of subjects, and you're talking about that himself today.
Yeah, I mean, I think he one of his main points, and as you say, he does clarify certain things where they were in error about, such as this man in 1 Corinthians 5. But he also talks about that I'm tying this with my talk earlier about them sort of being sophomoric. They were really puffed up about what they knew, and they felt like knowledge kind of was everything. And he has to tell them there's a value that's even greater than knowledge, and that's your love for one another. So humility, deference for one another, love for one another, considering the other more important than yourself. That attitude would enable them to deal with some of their differences of opinion or knowledge in a way that would be less confrontational and disruptive.
I'm going to put a section from Corinthians just sort of higher to that, but yes, he mentions this in chapter 8, and knowledge puffs up, sort of the imagery, paradox. Knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. Chapter 13, he really emphasizes love. I decided to go with this metaphor that he uses in chapter well, let me come back to that. First, even at the beginning of the letter, I appeal to you, brothers and sisters, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that all of you agree with one another in what you say, and that there be no divisions among you, but that you be perfectly united in mind and God. Again, I kind of refer to that here, thinking about the big picture and what you have together. Chapter 12, this point about as the body has many parts, but it all form one body, so it is with Christ. We've all been baptized by one Spirit, so as to form one body, whether Jews or Gentiles, slave or free. And we were given the one Spirit to drink. Even the body is not made up of one part, but many. If one part suffers, every part suffers. If one part is honored, every part rejoices. Now you are the body of Christ, and each one of you is a part of it. So, partly he goes at this by saying, okay, think of what you're a part of. Keep in mind you're part of a community. You're part of a body. And then he carries that over to chapter 13 in this message about love and treatment. But I'm encouraging you here to think about Paul is, partly unity is going to be intentions diminished and unity built by thinking what it is that we have and what our, you might put it, the desire for unity. If you desire attention, you're going to get it. In fact, even if you don't desire it, but you don't pay much attention to unity and the desire for it, you're probably going to get attention. What are some examples, if we just quickly mention other places in the New Testament, where you see this sort of, where Christians seem to have a hand on the big picture, and that they're part of a whole, and that they're working together as a family or a body? What would be some examples?
Acts 3.
Yeah, Acts 2, Acts 3, these people helping each other, selling the things they have, working. Again, it's a very communal kind of thing, even to a degree that it probably makes us feel at times a little, and we always caveat, we don't have to do that, and I don't think we do, but that sort of sense of community, communal interest. What does Paul himself say? You remember 1 Corinthians 9, the passage leading up to what we're talking about today? Paul was in many different places. He met with many different kinds of people. And so what attitude did he take?
Willing to become all things to all men.
Yeah, to those who were not Jewish, the Greco-Roman world, I was that. In the Jewish world, and the case with Timothy shows this, I behaved like a Jew. This wasn't hypocritical. He said, I did this to do what?
Win Christ.
Right. I was willing to do this to win people to Christ. And again, this reference there is more to, I think, bringing people to Christ than for building up people who are in Christ already. But the same idea holds this. I think all of us, keeping in mind, well, why do we have churches? Why isn't Christianity just an individual thing? Well, maybe some of it is the Lord is teaching us to live with tensions, because there are going to be tensions. But certainly the purpose is bigger than that. The purpose is that we aren't individuals. We are, but we're part of something bigger, and we gain identity by our relationship to Christ and our relationship with each other. Julie and I, this a little bit different application, but 2014 we spent the whole semester in England, and we were visiting a church right at the beginning. I don't know, 150 people, and I'd say 75% of them were in their 60s to 70s. And the song leader got up and like, okay, they put up a song on PowerPoint, and it was "How Great Is Our God." The song at the time, was a year or two old. I thought, well, how are all these 60 and 70, and they're going to sing this contemporary Christian song. I thought, man, if you did this back in many churches I've been at, there'd be like a protest. You might even have a march on this song. Well, you can't expect the old people to sing those. All these 60 and 70 songs we got singing, they were singing their hearts out. And that had a profound impact on me. Immediately, I felt like, we felt like sort of fish out of water. And all of a sudden, I feel like, hey, I'm with people that I share something with. And then they were so generous afterward, inviting us to tea. Well, yeah, go ahead, Lawrence.
Comes to mind, my mind's kind of saturated with Ephesians now, but one of the expressions Paul uses there is how in the church God's many-sided or manifold wisdom is revealed, and it's like there's so many aspects to who God is, to who Christ is, that no one individual can properly reflect the grandeur and glory of God. But a body of people with all of our different personalities and backgrounds and points of view can reflect to one another and back to God and out to all of creation the manifold wisdom of God.
Now I'm going to put him on more hat, and I don't know exactly. He's preached on Ephesians 4-8. I'm sticking mainly to 1 Corinthians. But even with this desire, and even seeing the big picture, like we talk about in marriage, tensions are going to rise. Differences in outlooks and actions are going to come up. And so as Lawrence preached a lesson many years ago, unity has to have a deeper, look, the desire for unity matters, and we need that big picture desire and see what we're part of. But we need something more than that. We need some shared experience and shared values that will help us get through when tensions do arise. And so we don't just go, well, because some days you're not going to feel the feeling. And so Paul deals with this too in chapters 1 and 2. I've merged some together. Yes, is Christ divided? Was Paul crucified for you? Were you baptized in the name of Paul? I resolved to know nothing while I was with you except Jesus Christ and Him crucified. Certainly many things matter. And the whole book is filled with things that Paul says, well, this really does matter. This does matter. But things can matter and things can really matter. Yet we understand that in a marriage. The things that at their core, the shared values, the shared experiences that we have in marriage, they become critical to that relationship and helping it through some of the difficult periods. And so there is a foundation to our belief. In fact, again, without going too far into this, Ephesians 4 really falls on this. Christ Himself gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the teachers and preachers to equip His people for works of service so that Christ may be built up and we all reach the unity of the faith and the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature, attaining to the full measure of the measure of the fullness of Christ. What does he say right preceding this? What's the foundation of this unity? Remember in Ephesians 4, there is one faith, one baptism, one God Father, one Spirit, one Lord, and one hope. And I think that's a pretty clear reference to the resurrection. And again, there are other things that matter in addition that are related to those things. But that's what Paul is saying in 1 Corinthians 1. I came to you knowing this message, that Jesus Christ was crucified for you. And so we got to recognize that there's a foundation. And again, keep coming back to that when tensions arise, and realizing, it's one of the things, it is interesting, you watch these things like Band of Brothers, or you read books about people in war, and they say, look, what keeps us going is not, there's we're going to win the war, but we're on the same team. That you're in battle with these people and you realize, hey, I'm depending on you, you're depending on me, we need each other. Here, if we keep coming back to the point to say, I think often people turn on each other when they forget who the real enemy is. When they forget that Satan isn't working for them. And that Satan would like to divide people who believe in Jesus Christ and who have hope of a resurrection and who believe in God the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. And he's always looking for ways to take our differences and drive wedges between us. And so sometimes, look, the more we say, well, we got to agree on everything, the more opportunities there are. The more you say, hey, we may disagree on this, but we still share the foundation of our faith and our belief. That really matters. So, we see, again, and this kind of comes back around to where we began, we see examples in the New Testament and Corinth of dealing with different beliefs, practices. And so, we put up here, things from the New Testament and the letter to the Corinthians. Don't live with this, but live with this. And we see both sides of this, the New Testament and even in this letter. So as we saw, this blatant immorality, say, well, is it all immorality bad? Well, what I'm getting at by using the term blatant, what did Paul say about this situation with this man?
Even the Gentiles, though this is not right.
Yeah, even these pagan Romans and Greeks would think, this is crazy. Now, that doesn't mean everybody in the world would have to think it's bad for this to be an immorality that we say, look, we need to do with this. But the reason I mention this, and I want to bring up a particular thing, because I don't think this is controversial among us. But, growing up, Lawrence and I were talking about this the other day. Growing up as a kid in the 60s, especially, smoking among it in many ways, it not just differed among individuals and their views, but even among different regions of the country. Where I grew up, there were people who smoked. That was very common. But nobody just smoked right outside the building. In between class, preaching, there was sort of. Then I moved up to Kentucky, and I went to 12th Street. I'm like, what are these people doing? They're smoking outside the building. Does this place have no moral code? And so, again, on some of these things, they kind of, look, smoking is bad for you. But, and people have arguments, well, your body's a temple of the Spirit, you're sinning against the Spirit, but, okay. But there's certainly a big difference in this and a man living with his wife. And we gotta be careful at times so we don't worm into, that sort of immorality, things where I might make a case for you shouldn't do this, but it's not like 1 Corinthians 5. But other places in the New Testament, we see, well, you can't live, here's someone teaching that the resurrection has already occurred. That's where the implication is, we missed it. Well, that is a problem. So, this is undercutting the faith of some. It's cutting away the foundation. In 2 John, we see this problem of people saying, again, Morris dealt with this, the deity and humanity of Jesus. In one way or another, saying things that Jesus really didn't come in the flesh. And John is saying, hey, this again, cuts at the very core of Christianity, and it's something that can't be lived with. It's interesting, both of those examples are really the negative side of Ephesians 4. Rather than having the one hope, you've taken away the one hope. Rather than saying Jesus is Lord, now you're diminishing who Jesus is. Also in the New Testament, there's quite a bit in places like Galatians and Colossians and other places, this problem of imposing restrictions and regulations, particularly related in the first century to people taking from the law of Moses and saying you got to do this, and not only teaching that, but creating divisiveness over that. Both of those seem to be an issue that in various letters is dealt with in pretty strong language. On the other hand, there are things that even here in the letter to the Corinthians say, all right, you need to live with this. For instance, in the text this morning, eating meat sacrificed to idols. Now, again, there's some encouragement. We have a later class on freedom and responsibility in Christ, and we'll deal with some of that in more detail. But sort of the message is that, hey, this is okay. And I've referred to here even stuff from the first chapter, the second chapter, this business about, I'm of Paul and I'm of Peter and I'm of Apollos. As you read more closely and you read the rest of the letter, you get a sense it wasn't just that people were dividing up. I like Peter better, therefore I'm of Peter, or whoever it was. Paul also refers. I've used our names in place maybe of other people's names. But there seem to be probably substantive issues that led to these different parties. And maybe what we see, these issues that he deals with as he goes through 1 Corinthians are the substantive issues that were leading to these divisions. But his real push in these first 4 chapters is, look, you need to get past this and realize we have some very important things in common. We have Jesus Christ and Him crucified, things like that. Then these things I'm mentioning are from Romans 14, that Paul particularly makes the case that, hey, eating meat and other foods, you need to live with each other on this. Observing special days, you need to live with each other on this. Now, the difficulty, we're not going to have a whole class on Romans 14. It's one of the reasons I went to 1 Corinthians. But one of the troubles of dealing with Romans 14 is how do these topics hit 21st century years?
Arcane.
Yeah, old, not really important. Why would somebody get up in arms about that? Now, again, we're sort of arriving, not so much within churches, but the world in general has kind of come full circle back to, food as a religion now. So you can get in trouble in some parts of the world with that. But this hits us as, well, these things really don't matter. It kind of strikes us as, do we want green cushions or brown cushions? How high, in fact, I've heard things sort of almost along these lines. We're going to have disagreements about how high the water fountain should be. We're going to have disagreements about what songs we want to sing. Now, sometimes it matters to us, but we wouldn't claim that, well, God said we must sing these songs. But think about the words Paul uses here. And think about this from a first century perspective. These things mattered to these people. If you look. I say it's kind of as echoes of 1 Corinthians 4. It's very similar language. Who are you to judge someone else's servant? To their own master's servant stand, and they will stand, for the Lord is able to make them stand. You then, Why do you judge your brother and sister? Why do you treat them with contempt? We all stand before God's judgment seat. Therefore, let us stop passing judgment on one another. Instead, make up your mind not to put any stumbling block or obstacle in the way of our brother and sister. Let us therefore make every effort to do what leads to peace and mutual edification. And so, in those words, you clearly see that he's talking about things that, at least to these first century Christians, really matter. These were hot button issues for them. Now, again, you can come back and say, well, yeah, but Paul goes on to say, well, these really don't matter. But I think that's sort of missing the point and the relevance of Romans 14 going forward for the Roman Christians and for us. Because do we have Paul today with us to say, well, this really doesn't matter? So, if that's the standard by which Romans 14 has to be applied going forward, then it's sort of pointless. We need apostolic sort of examples. So if we come back again, finding this balance between these things is vital. And so one of the questions like on this live with it is why the encouragement about growth like Ephesians 4 gives us if there's no growing? In other words, if all we're doing is saying, well, here's what was believed in 1870 or 1920 or 1970, and we just need to memorize that, why the admonition of growing? And the growing, what I'm getting at, it's an ongoing process. It's not, well, okay, you got a year. You got a year to get on board. Beyond that, then the growing doesn't apply. Or, let me ask it this way. Saying it that way, does that imply we already have everything right? Or another way, is a prevailing or dominant or majority view, isn't necessarily the truth? 70% of people think something, therefore that's true. Well, that can't be right. But yet that can become a very oppressive kind of thing in terms of classes. People express, okay, it's okay, or you can all live you, but don't ever express it. Well, that's sort of backwards. How do we ever grow? How do we ever come to a fuller knowledge of Christ if we don't have some back and forth? If we don't express differences to some extent? I don't mean this as a put down piety back here, but we shouldn't view classes at churches like a Chinese indoctrination camp. We're all sent here just to memorize the party principles. But on the other hand, there are things that we cannot tolerate. Somebody comes in and says, hey, I'm living with my father's wife. Or I'm living with this woman I'm not married. If it's something that's not exactly 1 Corinthians 5. Or I'm fooling around. Or, Jesus, this business about Jesus being God, I'm not sure where you're coming up with. These are the things that would fall closer to that. The difficulty arises for us in determining, okay, we see where Paul and other writers put these things. Well, what about issues that they're not directly dealing with? We have to put them in these categories. But I think it's instructive to think about, well, what are the things that they're saying, hey, this falls into things you just cannot live with. And that cannot just be, if you're going to put everything in there that differs from me, churches are going to get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. That if And really, everybody, look, I've seen issues come and go. Even the people who would be thinking, oh, we got to put a lot of stuff in and don't live with it. Even those people, even sometimes on their hot button issue, they got people that they live with. Well, it's okay to, Lawrence and I, I'll take Revelation. It's not quite as, easily digested as smoking in a class. But, Lawrence and I taught Revelation a couple of years ago together, and both of us leaned toward the idea that this was written in the time of Nero, and its specific historical application is maybe toward the 60s AD. But look, it has many important applications to the 90s, to the 170s AD, to the 200s, to years beyond. And many passages, Lawrence did a great job. They taught that in chapters 21 and 22. Hey, these passages seem to have a now and then element. There are things that Christians already have, they have in the future. But I won't pick on Will. I keep picking on him. Let's say Jared back here, he comes to the church, to me, this Nero business strikes me as cuckoo. This was written at the time of Domitian. Irenaeus makes that clear. In fact, if you're going down this road, then that could lead to this, and that can lead. And so, look, those are sorts of things that, I use this as an example because I think people really were very generous, and even there were some in the class who might, they might have thought we were cuckoo, but they didn't say that out loud. But you could sort of hear from the comments that they weren't totally on board with our particular leaning. But on the other hand, we were also not trying to just cram that down and make the book all about, well, the only thing we talk about here is the 60s AD. So I think that's how you work toward it. And there are always people at different points of belief and faith. And so, again, sometimes people turn to Romans 14 and say, well, this is about the weak. And then it becomes, well, and people try to claim the high ground, say, well, I'm the weak one here. You should, okay, that doesn't work either. His point is really not about who's weak and who's strong. It's about, right on these sorts of things, you need to be very careful, because he gives a reason for this, and he does so in 1 Corinthians 4. It's not just that so we can get on. I mean, that helps. But what does he ultimately say?
We're going to give an account before God, so
Right.
we want mercy and bear forgiveness.
Right. We're going to give an account. And God will judge things, and he'll get the judging right. So we don't have to judge every matter. We don't have to hold people in contempt over their belief. Look, that's good advice, even when we're talking beyond churches. I get frustrated at things that are going on in the world. I get frustrated when we talk about evil and evil people and things people are saying, things people are doing. But sometimes myself, or Julie may have to do this to me, all right, let's bring it back down. That these people, they're going to stand before God too. And praying for their souls, praying for them to come to see Jesus as Lord. I could do that. If I get very frustrated, asking the Lord to deal with this, but ultimately realizing, look, I don't have to right everything. And I don't have to take care of everything. And I think that, coming back to where we started here, trying to have churches where we both don't tolerate things, that's important. And you can see that there are churches around the world of various sorts that get to the point where you go, well, what is your share? That it seems that the only emphasis is that, well, we're different. Well, that's really not much of a basis. There's got to be a basis besides the fact that we differ and that we still sit beside each other. And so My main thing here is, and I wasn't going to try to go down some list of things in our time, but getting you to think about and be comfortable with this tension and thinking through it and ways of using letters like First Corinthians as a means of thinking through that. Anybody ever had a time here? I know the last part of your phone was off. Left behind, feel free to be at ease. Thank you all.